Good morning, all. I would have preferred to give this talk in person today, but I unfortunately caught a nasty bug over the weekend, so I'm presenting this way instead. My name is Ian Harding, and I work for the Red Cliff Band's Treaty Natural Resources Division. And today I'm going to talk about some recent work we did sampling historic lean lake trout spawning locations in the Apostle Islands of Lake Superior. The Lake Superior Committee recently announced the achievement of lake trout restoration in Lake Superior. This comes after nearly 70 years of collaborative rehabilitation efforts by indigenous, provincial, state, and federal agencies. It was efforts such as sea lamprey control, stocking, and coordinated fisheries management, which includes the protection of critical habitats such as spawning and nursery habitats that allowed lake trout populations to recover from their near extirpation during the mid-1900s. Step one in protecting critical habitats, like spawning habitats, was creating detailed inventories of these. Coverley and Horrell did this for spawning grounds for many species of fish in the Wisconsin waters of the Great Lakes in 1980. And soon after, Goodyear et al. Did a similar effort for spawning and nursery habitats, but did this throughout the Great Lakes. So for today's talk, I'm just going to focus on inventories of lean lake trout spawning habitat or spawning grounds just in the Apostle Islands, the area shown here within the black square in Lake Superior, and then Red Cliff's recent assessment of these spawning grounds. So Coverley and Horrell interviewed commercial fishermen that fished at different areas in the Wisconsin waters of the Great Lakes. And for the Apostle Islands region, some of these people they interviewed, they were actively fishing as early as the 1920s. So pre-lamprey invasion, and probably a pretty reasonable historic look at where these fish were spawning in the islands before they were decimated in the mid-1900s. And one of the cool things that they did is they had these fishermen draw on NOAA nautical charts where they thought these spawning populations were. It also gives you a flavor for how big they thought the spawning grounds were relative to each other. The Goodyear Atlas for the Apostle Islands area was as no surprise, was heavily informed by Coverley and Horrell, but also included additional information from other sources, a lot of them just personal communications with agency folk in the area. So on this map, the blue polygons are the areas that were drawn in Coverley and Horrell, and these show the extent of the lean lake trout spawning grounds as they were understood by the fishermen at that time. The red circles are just points. They're not meant to show the extent of spawning grounds. And these are from the Goodyear Atlas, and these are not in Coverley and Horrell. The large red polygon to the north is the Devil's Island Refuge, which was established in 1981. And the large red polygon to the east is the Gull Island Refuge, which was established in 1976. Some of these sites have been routinely sampled by Red Cliff TNR and Wisconsin DNR, and those are shown in red. Sites to the west by Red Cliff and sites to the east by Wisconsin DNR. The sites in gray, I don't know the last time these sites were sampled for spawning lake trout. The last record I'm aware of are personal communications from 1979 as cited in the Goodyear Atlas. So we thought it was time for a more recent investigation of these. Starting in 2015, Red Cliff TNR started sampling these areas. We fished bottom set gill nets on the suspected spawning grounds during the spawning season for lean lake trout. Spawning surveys can be tricky because the fish come and go, and it's unlikely they use the entirety of a shoal for spawning. So you have to be in the right place at the right time. To improve our chances of achieving this, we sampled most sites 3 or more times during the 9 years we did this assessment. And I summarized the data as the maximum catch per unit of effort observed during the 9-year period. Catch per unit effort, you'll see abbreviated as CPE throughout this talk, is simply the catch divided by the amount of net fished. In this case, the number of lean lake trout caught per kilometer of net fished. Lastly, I'd like to thank Trey Carl, Wisconsin DNR, for sharing their data for the sites they sample in the Eastern Apostle Islands. What we found was a wide range of CPEs, from a couple of fish per kilometer of net to more than 500 fish per kilometer of net. Because of this wide range, I'm showing the max CPEs as orders of magnitude. So on this map, the gray indicates areas where the max CPE was in the single digits. The CPE range for these sites was 2 to 9 fish per kilometer of net. The light blue shows sites where the max CPE was tens of fish, and the CPE range for these sites was 12 to 70 fish per kilometer of net. The dark blue shows sites where the max CPE was hundreds of fish. The CPE range for these sites was 141 to 519 fish per kilometer of net. And the yellow shows sites that we were not able to sample. As you can see, the largest spawning aggregations were all in the Eastern Islands. And this matches observations from references within the Goodyear Atlas. So 33 years later, at least on a course level, the pattern's kind of unchanged. The next 5 slides, I'm going to take a look at specific sites and maybe try to tease apart reasons that might explain this spatial pattern and what we observed. Both Corbally and Horrell and Goodyear and all describe the Gull Island Shoal Complex as highly productive, or the largest spawning area in the islands. Spawning fish that use this shoal complex were one of the few spawning populations that persisted in Lake Superior. Many of the other spawning populations were severely depleted or completely gone by the mid-1900s. So because of this shoal was the focus of many studies investigating lake trout recovery in the islands. And the Gull Island Refuge was created in 1976 to protect this population. This spawning population and refuge are thought to be very important to lake trout recovery in the Wisconsin waters of Lake Superior. Devil's Island Shoal was described as one of the most productive spawning areas in the islands, and it was essentially devoid of spawning fish by the 1960s. Attempts to reestablish a spawning population on Devil's Island Shoal by stocking fingerlings and yearlings were thought to be unsuccessful. It wasn't until the 1980s when Wisconsin DNR planted fertilized eggs on artificial turf incubators on the shoal, which was thought to have reestablished a spawning population. Coberly and Horrell and Goodyear and all mentioned that boats would fish for spawn off the north tip of Rocky Island, and that's about all they described. We had previously sampled other sites with a very similar description to this, but those sites ultimately had low to very low catch rates. So for this reason, we were not sure what to expect for this location. But it turns out it had the highest catch rate of all the locations we sampled for this study. Not really sure why this is, but I suspect it has something to do with how close it is to the restored spawning population on Devil's Island Shoal. Bear Island Shoal was described as quite productive in the early 1900s, but that it gave out soon after. We observed a max CPE of 33 fish per kilometer of net at this location. So fish are certainly using it, but catch rates were low relative to the better sites to the east. Since the spawning population was completely wiped out at this site in the early 1900s, this shoal did need to be recolonized. Many references discussed how stocked fish were not effective at recolonizing these offshore shoals. It appeared they were just unsuccessful at finding them. And unlike Devil's Island Shoal, I'm not aware of any targeted effort to stock fertilized eggs or other life stages in an attempt to recruit a spawning population here. So the shoal will certainly be used by fish, but not that many relative to the better sites in the islands. So maybe it's just still in the process of being recolonized. Alternatively, perhaps the habitat at Bear Island Shoal has changed, and the number of spawners now is proportional to the current habitat quality and quantity. And the last site I'm going to talk about today is Eagle Island Shoal. Coberly and Horrell described how fishermen used to take spawn here using pound nets. To me, this suggests this area was productive. I don't think a fisherman would have gone to the trouble of fishing this area if it wasn't productive. We observed a max CPE of 2 fish per kilometer of net here, so in my mind, effectively there isn't a spawning population. Like the other sites, I don't know what happened here. Is it waiting to be recolonized, like some of the other sites perhaps? Or maybe the habitat quantity and quality has changed. So to recap, most of the sites we sampled had relatively low catch rates. The best sites were in the Eastern Islands, which is similar to observations made over 33 years ago. I don't know why this is, but it could be due to the fact that the refuges are doing what they're designed to do. Spawning aggregations are larger in these areas because of the extra protection. Or perhaps many of the offshore shoals are still in the process of being recolonized. The refuges were created to protect the remnant and reintroduced populations at Gull Island Shoal and Devil's Island Shoal. So maybe fish are just slowly spreading from these spawning populations to other shoals, and this process takes a while. And maybe the habitat quality and quantity are the limiting factors. It's hard to say how productive some of these sites were historically. There's just not enough information on them. But for the sites that do have information on their historical productivity, has the habitat quality and quantity changed? As this image shows, some sites may be impacted by sedimentation. The South Shore in Wisconsin is typically usually pretty muddy. There might be some legacy impacts from mining in the area. Reserve mining, which was near Silver Bay, Minnesota, the red dot shown on the map, dumped 67,000 tons of mining tailings into Lake Superior daily for 25 years. And there are accounts of this material coming into the islands. There are also many sawmills operated throughout this area historically, and many of them dump their sawdust right into the lake. And the sawdust is persistent. You can still see it throughout the lake today. The map shows the locations of some of these sites that I personally know about, but this is by no means comprehensive. There's an interesting anecdote, I don't know the time period, but on the north tip of the peninsula, a tourist was going for a walk with her dog. The dog is running along a fisherman's dock, and there was so much sawdust on the water, the dog thought it was land and jumped in and almost drowned and had to be rescued by some fishermen. It tells you how thick the sawdust was in certain areas. And this is more of a future threat. Invasive dry-seeded mussels are currently found in very low densities in the islands, but they are establishing in higher densities in areas of the lake, which is really concerning to me. So for these reasons, we want to do a more detailed investigation of spawning habitat in the islands. To start, we want to learn more about what habitat features the fish are selecting for spawning. This could help inform future habitat inventories and restoration. And this is also an old question, but thanks to new technology and new data collected by federal agencies like National Park Service and NOAA, we can now take a more detailed look at this. We're planning to start a fine-scale positioning study of lake trout and whitefish spawning locations on Gull Island Shoal starting this fall. So that concludes my talk. I would like to thank the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and the Bureau of Indian Affairs for funding this work, and Red Cliff TNR's crew for assistance with field work, including Ashley, who's pictured here losing a fight with a lake trout during this assessment. Miigwech for your attention.